time, I would like to call the special board workshop to order. Roll call.
Arancibia,
Present.
Emerald,
Here.
Lopez Zepeda,
Here.
Segura, Solis,
Present.
Aguirre.
Here.
At this moment, we will go ahead and have a moment of silence and the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand. Please put your right hand over your heart. We begin. I pledge allegiance
To the
to the
flag
flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation,
under
under
God,
God,
indivisible,
with
with
liberty
and
and
justice
justice for
for all. For Government Code Section 54954.3, this is the point on the agenda where members of the public may address the board on the item that has been described in the notice for the board workshop before consideration of that item. Speakers shall refrain.
Looks like he froze.
I think we lost you, Dr. Arancibia. Can I read the statement?
Yes.
Per Government Code Section 54954.3, this is the point on the agenda where members of the public may
Oh,
address.
no.
There he is.
Yeah, it's switched on. I'm so sorry. Something happened right now where my internet just got spotty, but I apologize. I'll read it for you.
Okay, go ahead.
Per Government Code Section 54954.3, this is the point of the agenda where members of the public may address the board on the item that has been described in the notice for the board workshop before or during consideration of that item. Speakers shall refrain from using profanity and shall speak in a respectful manner. Thank you for your cooperation.
There are no speakers, Mr. Vice President.
So we will be discussing the following things. Number one, the Brown Act. Number two, ethics training. Number three, budget overview. And number four, local control and accountability plan overview, the LCAP overview.
Thank you, Trustee Arancibia. At this point, we wanted to come together as we get ready to engage the governance work moving forward on behalf of our district and present an overview and a training regarding the matters you have identified, including Brown Act, ethics training, as well as providing a general overview of where we stand in the process for our budget and an overview of our local control and accountability plan, our LCAP, as it is in essence our strategic plan for our district and how we move forward. And again, since we do have a newly reconstituted board based on the elections, we thought this would be a good opportunity to review some of this information, which is really foundational and which is critical to establish an understanding collectively of the work moving forward. And so with that, Ms. Carbuccia, our General Counsel, will be working to present information along with our counsel, special counsel, regarding Brown Act and ethics training. Dr. Sawkel will provide a budget overview, and we will have Dr. Alvarez present an overview of our local control and accountability plan. That is the plan for this evening's board meeting, board workshop. And again, it is in anticipation of the work moving forward as a governance team. And so with that, I will ask Ms. Carbuccia to reintroduce the items regarding Brown Act and ethics training. Ms. Carbuccia.
Thank you. So as you can probably hear, you don't want to listen to me for 30 minutes. So what I have asked is Ruben Duran, our special counsel, outside counsel, to come in and do this presentation for you. We're really focusing on two major areas. We're talking about the areas of open and transparent government, which really cover the Brown Act and the Public Records Act areas. service. And then secondarily, we're covering ethical training and ethical treatment, which is expected of our public officials, which will cover our conflict of interest areas. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Ruben, who's a partner at Best and Krieger BBK, happens to also be a graduate of UCSD. So for many of us, that's really important, including a couple of us on the dais. As well, he happens to be the president of our bar association, which our state bar, which is what Dr. Arancibia was alluding to. We're really, really lucky. He's an expert in governance areas, and so really, you're getting a much better deal listening to him than listening to me. But we'll tag team any questions that you have at the end. But at the moment, I'm ceding my voice to Ruben. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Carbuccia. Good afternoon, Dr. Arancibia, members of the board. Mr. Solis, it's a pleasure to see you again, if on the screen only, and a pleasure to make your acquaintance. Board Member Lopez Cepeda and Board Member Emerald, congratulations on your respective elections. I certainly wish you a long and successful tenure here at the district. I know that the work that you and your colleagues on the board do is critical for the success of your community and the well-being of your young people and really the economic growth and vitality of this region. So it's my pleasure and honor to be here with you for a very quick, now 27 or 28 minutes. Mr. Aguirre was clear that he was going to pull the hook on me if I talk too long. And I will say that what we're going to go through very quickly, what I'm calling the essential tools for successful legal compliance, could and often does take an hour and a half, 2, sometimes 3 hours worth of training in various settings. And so we are necessarily going to only cover the major themes of these important concepts for public service in a school district. Certainly your general counsel, Ms. Carbuccia, is well versed in all of these things, and if not for her voice, you would be, I'm sure, hearing from her today. But she and I have worked together at various points over the district's history on some exciting and important things, and it's certainly a pleasure for me to be here this evening. If at any point you want to jump in with a question because something is critical or burning, please don't hesitate to do so. Even though we don't have a lot of time for a conversation, I have always found that taking these topics in a conversational way certainly is more interesting and more fun, but also can be much more instructive because we're getting to the meat of what is on your minds as board members. And so I am going to use this thing here, to move through. And so as Jen mentioned, open and transparent is sort of the calling card of all local government in California. Not only because the legislature demands it, but because I believe that people like you who run for office understand that the public's trust is among the most important things that we all rely on when we're spending public money, right? That's what's happening here is this boardroom, the papers that we have in front of us, all of those resources are spending public money, which the public entrusts to you. And so the law in California assumes that we're going to do so, and when we're serving the public in an open and transparent manner. We've talked about very quickly the Brown Act, which is California's open meeting law, and this applies to all local governments, including school districts. And the basic idea is that anytime you have a meeting of the legislative body, that is the 5 elected representatives, that meeting be conducted in an open manner with the opportunity for the public to observe what it is that you're doing, unless it's in closed session, which we can talk about very briefly, and also the opportunity to offer their comments, their thoughts, their concerns before the board as a whole takes any action, okay? So there are several key components to this idea of openness and transparency under the Brown Act. The first is posted agendas, essentially written notice to the public of what it is you're going to be discussing and or deciding. The opportunity, as I've said, for the public to offer comment on those items. And of course, the reality is that a school district is very much like a business, and so sometimes there is a need for confidentiality, for you to receive advice from your legal counsel, for example, for you to properly engage in a real estate transaction and negotiation preparations, for you to engage in instructing your negotiators when it comes to a labor contract or a union contract. The Brown Act does allow for you to take the appropriate time and place to have those confidential conversations. And I will say that courts interpret these requirements very narrowly. In other words, either Ms. Carbuccia or Mr. Geary or sometimes someone like I may have to say to the board or to a board member, as much as you would like to talk about topic X in a closed session, it doesn't necessarily fall squarely within the allowed exemption under the Brown Act. And the courts very often will agree on that general notion. And so we try to give you the tools that you need, always understanding that the courts are going to typically side with more openness and more transparency. Ultimately, the board will have the opportunity to make some of those risk decisions. It's our job to give you the advice. It's your job to make the call. Okay, so under the Brown Act, a meeting is anytime you have a majority or more of your board. Since you are 5 elected members, that means 3 of you, either in one actual physical place or in one figurative place, to hear, discuss, or deliberate any item of school district business. And courts will interpret that language broadly, and it doesn't have to be all in the same room. It could be, as we're doing here now with the use of technology. It could be over the phone. It could be by email. It could even be through comments on social media, which I know makes Ms. Carbuccia and me kind of like cringe. I'm not a social media guy, but it is a reality I know of your interfacing with the public. But there are special rules that apply to elected officials with respect to your use of social media. If you have specific questions about that, we can get to them later. There are exceptions to this general rule of prohibition on gathering 3 or more of you. One is a social gathering. In other words, yes, it is allowable for 3 or more of you to go to dinner or go to somebody's birthday party, as long as you're not talking about district business while you're there. There are ceremonial occasions in your role as a public official, of course, where you are very much sought after individuals, right, to go and attend some, ribbon cutting, thank you very much, or any other community event. Of course, the law recognizes that you're going to be there and you're expected to be there and you want to be there. But again, the basic rule is please don't talk about agency business, about school district business when you're there, because, why? The public hasn't had advance notice that you're going to be there and they don't have an opportunity to see and hear what you're saying or to offer their comment. Be very careful of illegal serial meetings through either technology or an intermediary. That's where perhaps Mr. Aguirre, or let's just say it's I talked to Board Member Lopez Cepeda, and we have a very meaningful, in-depth conversation about an item of school district business. It would be improper for me to then go to 2 more among your member and say, Board Member Lopez Cepeda told me X, Y, or Z, right? Even though we're sharing a attorney-client privileged communication, even though the public wouldn't have a right to see that, this public still has a right to know that a majority of the board was having a conversation about the issue that we talked about. And so Ms. Carbuccia is well versed on all of these, and I'm sure that she has and will continue to give you good advice there. These are the general requirements under the Brown Act for your noticing of your agendas.
Ruben, can I step in for just 1 second?
Absolutely.
So on that last slide, it's a perfect example. When you meet with Dr. Aguirre will always walk through the agenda with you individually, but he's never going to, and the example is he's never going to say, yeah, and when I was meeting with Mr. Solis, he said, he supports this item. It really is a one-way information sharing. So when we talk about serial meetings, it's not that we don't have the opportunity as staff to meet with you individually and have discussions, but our obligation also is to not share what we hear from one of you with the other, because that's how it becomes a serial meeting. It's one information carrying back and forth. So that's the distinction that you need to know.
And that one-way briefing from Dr. Aguirre or another staff member is specifically recognized as an exception in the language of the Brown Act. There's a statutory provision and court cases interpreting it to say it's perfectly okay for you to meet with one member of your staff, even with one member of the community, as long as the information is going one way only and not among a majority of the board members there. For a regular meeting, the law says you have to have at least 72 hours of a noticed posted agenda, so that and that posting has to be on your website and here physically at your meeting location, 24 hours for a special meeting. A special meeting can be called either by the president of the board or a majority of the board upon 24 hours notice to discuss and or decide on a very specific item that really just can't wait until your next regular meeting. The public must be allowed to comment on any topic within your subject matter jurisdiction or on every item prior to your taking a vote on that item. For special meetings, different agencies handle this differently, but the law does allow you to limit public comment to only the item or items that are listed on the special meeting agenda. You don't necessarily have to open it up to all topics of general interest. Again, it's, different agencies handle it differently, and I apologize, I don't remember how you do it here, but the law does give you some of that flexibility. One thing I like to point out is, and now that election season is over, maybe it's a little less salient at the moment, but when election season happens, folks are going to come up here and they're going to poke holes at electeds and incumbents, or maybe sometimes. I never let it happen with candidates because I have a strict rule of no campaigning at a board meeting at any time. But the Brown Act specifically says you cannot stop a member of the public from criticizing a member of the board about their official duties or actions in office or your high-level staff. Okay, let's switch over. Any questions on the Brown Act before I go to the Public Records Act? Mr. Solis, Dr. Dancivia? Ms. Emerald? Nope? Okay. The Public Records Act is the other piece of the dual, the dual system of openness and transparency in California. And again, it all goes back to the same concept that because the business of the district is the public's business, the public has a right to inspect nearly every record or document that goes into the running of that business. Courts have interpreted this right for public records very broadly, and the definition of record is expansive and includes virtually anything and everything that is a recorded piece of information, whether it's video, audio, paper, and I'm a man of a certain age, so I'm
Social media.
social media, yes. All of those things, if they relate to school district business, are going to be presumed to be public records open to inspection and or quote unquote providing copies thereof. And really important, and it's a number of years now, but there was a time in my practice where I would say, there's a new case called City of San Jose versus Superior Court. No longer a new case. I think we are all familiar with the City of San Jose case, which says whether it's on a school district server or your personal cell phone or your personal tablet, if you're talking about school district business and it's not otherwise confidential and exempt, it is open to inspection and copying. All of that to say, if you don't want to have to open up your personal devices to your general counsel or anyone else who might need to be looking for documents in response to requests for public records, don't do district business on those devices. That's sort of the easy way to handle it. Now, I understand the reality of our world is people will call you, people will text you, whatever number they have. I have found it very useful to remind people with whom I'm communicating that I'm a public official. I'm a city attorney in 2 towns up in the Inland Empire. I let folks know, look, communications to you or to any of our clients might be public records, so please be aware of that. When a public records request comes in, the district has to make an initial response within 10 days. That response does not mean that you have to actually provide records. You just need to let the requester know whether you have documents that are responsive and when you intend to produce them. In certain circumstances, if the request is highly complicated or asks for a voluminous number of records that you have to basically go and search for, you can extend that 10-day deadline by an additional 14 days, so a total of 24 days to make that initial determination. And again, there is no direct specified limit on when records must be produced in response to a records request, only that they produce promptly. Okay. All right. We're gonna,
Before you leave, PRAs, just as an FYI, Kelly, will you wave your hand? Kelly is the paralegal that generally deals with Public Records Act requests in our office. If in fact someone asks for your personal information from your personal accounts, our process internally is you sign an affidavit, you will search through your phone, your accounts, you list every account, you list the information, and you give us the documents. We then may work with you on redacting. We can also help you search all those should it happen. We get roughly, on a really a low year, about 60, on a high year, about 100 plus Public Records Act requests annually. And that is something that we will work directly with you. If it's something that's on your district documentation or board documentation, we can search that directly for you. But so that is something that will directly impact you as board members. It is one of the major reasons we talk about social media being the bane of our existence. That is where the case law most recently has come out, in particular related to our friends at Poway. And thanks to them, we are dealing with some new requirements related to social media specifically. So as much as possible, we would very much like business not to take place in social media, and especially amongst any of you. It's one thing to like Mr. Solis's daughter's birthday party. It's another to make comments about an event, because if 3 of you act, even with an emoji up, emoji down, comment, even if someone tags you as a member of the public, you have now potentially created a meeting back in our Brown Act. So it hits us, they search our records, and that's how they find out that we violated the Brown Act. So there's a big fat process tying these two things together.
and I have to say that I appreciate Ms. Carbuccia's example of the social media, the difference between the birthday party and a like or a post on a social media posting about district business. The legislature's also actually made it very easy for elected officials. It's very maddening, but it's also very easy because I want to say maybe 3 years ago now, it could be more, the legislature said anytime one member of an elected body posts to social media or engages in social media communications, another member, it doesn't even go to 3, it's just number 2 is the magic number there. Another member may not like, repost, forward, dislike, or comment on that social media post. It is per se a Brown Act violation. It's an extremely frustrating rule because social media is such a ubiquitous way of communication. I have to admit that I'm unaware of any case law where the new law has been challenged or whether somebody's ever been prosecuted or otherwise punished for engaging in it. But I can tell you that I don't want one of the clients that I work with to be that first case, that first big case in California. And I hate to be the bearer of bad news there, but that's true. I like the birthday party example. It's an easy way to remember it. Thank you. Okay, if there are no questions on the Public Records Act or the Brown Act, I've got like 6 minutes left, Dr. Aguirre, something like that. We'll move over. Okay, great. We're going to talk about the other key component of public service is that we hope and we trust that all of us in this room, but especially the folks who are elected by the public, treat their responsibilities always with the highest ethical standards and really basic common fairness in mind. Fairness to the people who are coming and asking you for your actions, obviously fairness to all the employees that work here at the district and the students. And again, this is an area where it's literally, we can talk for 3 hours about the things I'm going to run through very quickly here. And I don't mean to preach, but I do never want to waste the opportunity to say that having worked with public agents, dozens, if not hundreds of public agencies and officials over my 23-year career, this is where people get in trouble, unfortunately. Most of the time, it's not on purpose, right? Most of the time, folks want to do the right thing, but these rules can be tricky sometimes. Some of them are common sense, but some of them are very detailed and can be tricky. And so if you ever have a doubt or a question about whether something you're thinking about doing is ethical or not, or within the rules or not, is another way to put it, please, I do highly encourage you and respectfully do so to speak with Ms. Carbuccia, Dr. Aguirre, or someone else whom you trust to give you the straight answers on these questions. The first conflicts of interest law in California that we always talk about is Government Code Section 1090. That is essentially a self-dealing prohibition, which says it is against the law for a public agency to contract with a member of its own body. And it's I want to say it's a very easy, straightforward rule, but the fact that there are so many exceptions written into the law sort of belies that fact. The fact that there are many reported cases from the California Supreme Court all the way down to your local 4th District Court of Appeal or whatever it is means that sometimes these easy, quote-unquote, easy questions can be difficult. And so certainly please check with your legal counsel. And if you have a question about whether something that you're considering or the district is considering might violate Government Code Section 1090. The reason why some of us harp so much on Government Code Section 1090 is because a violation of 1090 has severe and harsh consequences, both for the public official, for the agency involved, and even the third party with whom you are attempting to contract. For one thing, it's embarrassing, right? It's embarrassing for our agency to sort of be caught, even if it was an unintentional, honest mistake. It's just sometimes the newspapers are going to say what they're going to say, and we never want to be in the position of having to explain ourselves. But also for public officials specifically, the law does attach civil and potential criminal penalties for violations of Government Code Section 1090, and we've all seen up and down the state the images on the newspapers and TV of the perp walk or all of that, and it's unfortunate, and it really does shake the confidence and the trust of the people that we serve. There are exceptions for what are called remote and non-interest under Government Code Section 1090. Things like serving on the board of a nonprofit, for example, is I believe it's a non-interest. I always get caught up. I will tell you that it's maybe like 17 or 18 specific exemptions in Government Code Section 1091 and 1091.5, and that's why you have a general counsel to help us look through those specific statutes. But if you ever have a question, obviously, please reach out. The next conflict of interest law in California is Government Code Section 87,000 et sec, which is also known as the Political Reform Act. The basic rule under the Political Reform Act is that a board member may not vote on, influence, or attempt to influence a governmental decision in which they have a financial interest. A lot of sort of, it's a quick sentence, but it's a mouthful, and there are a lot of different pieces to it. I guess what I will point out here for my purposes for this very quick discussion is that it's not just, hey, I recuse myself from voting and everything's cool. It's really all of the work, all the preparatory work that leads up to that governmental decision. And even if it's not the board that makes the governmental decision, because I know that Dr. Aguirre has a certain amount of authority under your procedures and your policies and your budget to make decisions. If Dr. Aguirre is going to make a decision that involves a financial interest of yours, it is a violation of the Political Reform Act for you to influence or attempt to influence his decision. And I don't mean to call you out on the carpet, sir, but you're the man in charge. So, it is the most common place where that happens, quite frankly. But it extends all the way down to the cabinet. Anytime a governmental decision is being made by this agency, if one of your financial interests is involved, don't try and influence the decision. I feel like a really bad preacher right now. I apologize. But this stuff matters. Now, it's not to say that the decision can't be made, that the board can take the vote. It's just that you may not be involved in making that decision. And this happens when you have what? A financial interest. So the way that the Fair Political Practices Commission, which is a state agency charged with enforcing the Political Reform Act, the way that they enforce the act is through this very simplified 4-part test, which I can tell you represents 150 pages of regulations that the FPPC puts out. and dozens of more pages of reported cases. But what we'll do is we'll walk you through this process, okay? So we know that there's a decision coming up, and we know that, hey, one of our financial interests might be at stake. And let's take a pause here to talk about what financial interest means. Dr. Arancibia, Mr. Solis, Ms. Emerald, Board Member Lopez Cepeda, anybody want to take a guess at what we're talking about when I say financial interests? This is a school setting. I'm going to call you guys out. What is a financial interest? What are common financial interests for people working and living in this world that we live in? Bribes is a very yeah. We hope we don't have a financial interest in bribes. Absolutely. But just in my day-to-day life, also, what like as a person working in California, what are my financial interests? What do you think affects my finances? My job,
My job,
right?
cost of living,
Yep.
Property values.
Yes. Board Member Emerald said
business
property,
interests.
business interests. Exactly right. So
And
what this
generally speaking, if you're receiving some remuneration that is not available to anybody else who doesn't hold your position.
That's right. That's right. Thank you.
Yeah.
And that is going to be the segue into a very quick discussion of gifts. But the discussion here is just to say that everything that everyone has just said is accurate and correct, and it's not even all of what we're talking about, right? There are a lot of ways that we have financial interests in the world. Investments in businesses, investments in real property. Again, my job that pays me. All of those things, if they are somehow potentially involved in a decision of the district, we're going to put you through this 4-part test to make sure that you can participate. I'm not going to read it to you. It's there on the screen. But the things that are underlined, reasonable foreseeability, materiality, and the public generally exception, all of those things are sort of where the rubber meets the road when we're analyzing whether a decision that's going to be made either at the board level or at the staff level is going to affect one of your public interests, one of your financial interests, excuse me. Any questions? Love it. Thank you. Let's just say we've identified that, yes, there is an action coming up at a school site that is across the street from where Dr. Arancibia lives. The standard under the regulations is for real property. If the real property that is the basis of the decision is within 500 feet of your own real property, whether you live there or invest there, you are automatically disqualified from participating. Okay, not that the board can't make a decision, just that Dr. Arancibia may not participate in making that decision. If it's more than 1,000 feet away, the law automatically presumes that it's completely cool for Dr. Arancibia to participate in that decision. That 500 to 1,000 foot threshold is what we call limbo land. And what happens there is we have to make a reasonable, detailed analysis about whether the decision will affect the value of that property. And when I say affect the value of that property, can somebody tell me what I think that means? What you think I think that means?
I think it means that because of the decision that's going to be made at the school site, your property value is going to go up because it would be an improvement.
Okay. Okay, that is part of the answer. But it could, if the property value is going to go down, it would also trigger this rule. So it's any financial effect according to the materiality standard. So thank you for the answer. It's very instructive as to what my point there was, which is why it was sort of a trick question. I have to admit it. I apologize, but that was my point. Essentially, it doesn't have to just improve or up the value of your property, even if it's going to negatively affect the value of your property. The law presumes, well, shoot, you're going to care about that, right? And we don't want to put you in the position of worrying about your own financial interests against the district's interest in whatever that school site or that contract is. So 500 feet, don't do it. 1,000 feet or more, you're okay. Between 500 and 1,000, we're going to want to analyze it. And that's a very, very quick and dirty rule of thumb.
What's the monetary limit? Like if it was a contract?
So depending on the financial interest at stake, there are various limits. So if it's income, it's $500 or more of income over the previous 12 months. If it's real estate, it's whether you have $2,000 or more of interest in that real estate. And I mean, Truth be told, we're in California. If you have an interest in a piece of real estate, $2,000 happens in a day or two, right? If it's like stocks and bonds, there are various other triggering thresholds depending on the type of investment that it is. And again, all of this is laid out in the rules and regulations, and we're happy to walk you through it whenever you need to. But, okay, so we have determined that Dr. Arancibia lives within 500 feet of that school site that the contract or that the decision's about. Dr. Arancibia, that means you must what? You must turn your mic on.
Recuse myself.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. That's exactly right. You must recuse yourself. And what it means to recuse oneself in where you're sitting is that you actually, again, just like the Political Reform Act, don't attempt to influence the decision even before the board meeting. But also at the board meeting, get up and leave the room while your colleagues are discussing the item and ultimately when they vote on it. The reason for that is so that you don't sit over here and give somebody the evil eye and attempt to influence them even non-verbally. It's a wacky rule, but guess what? People do wacky things when money's involved. And so what the law says is let's remove that possibility whatsoever. Go ahead and just leave the room, and we'll call you back in when the decision has been voted on. There is one exception to this rule, because of course we're lawyers and that's what we do. If the item is on the consent calendar, you do not have to leave the room or the dais, but you do have to announce what your recusal is and the reason for it prior to the vote on the consent. Ms. Vicedo will note in the minutes that you are recused from item blank on the consent calendar and everybody's happy. And she will also note the reason. Dr. Arancibia lives within 500 feet of that school site, and she'll put that in the minutes, I hope. Right? Okay, any questions? Let's talk about reporting your economic interests. The Form 700 is the bane of some people's existence, but it is the primary vehicle through which the public has the opportunity to basically take a look at what your financial interests are so that they themselves can essentially double check you on whether you should be recusing yourself or not. And I will tell you that when we get Public Records Act requests for your Form 700s, that's more or less what people are doing. They're checking to see that you are not getting involved in a decision from which you should otherwise be recused. The reporting requirements on Form 700 are there. I won't read them for you, unless, of course, you like me to, or if you have a specific question about what the reporting requirements are in terms of timing. Essentially, when you assume office annually every April 1st thereafter, and when you leave office. Okay, one of the things that you report on your Form 700, other than your income and your real property interests and certain investments, are gifts that have been given to you because you're a board member, by virtually anybody, right? Whether or not they're seeking to do business with the district, I can see your puzzled look, and I'm gonna get there. But the general rule as an elected official is you've got the most broad gift reporting requirements. Now, thank God the legislature has some common sense, and there are multiple exceptions as to what should be reported. So let's go to the thresholds first. What the law says is anytime over the space of a year you receive a single gift or multiple gifts whose value in the aggregate is $50 or more, you must report the gift and the source of the gift. And a gift is virtually anything that you receive that is of value for which you didn't pay, okay? Dinner, golf, go out to a movie. Now, the most common exception is you're not gonna have to report gifts from your family members. Of course, the law knows that you're getting gifts from your family members, and that's nobody's business. However, if you have a family member who gives you a gift because they want to influence a decision that the board is making, the law will very closely look at that, and I just advise you to be cautious if that's the situation. You know, small communities, you never know. So $50 is one number you need to be aware of. $520 is the next number. What the law says is you may not accept a single gift valued at $520 or more in the year. You're just disqualified from receiving it. If you're receiving multiple gifts over the course of a year and the value reaches $520, then Any subsequent gifts, you have to respectfully decline them. If you receive a gift and you donate it to a charity within 30 days of having received the gift, that is not reportable as long as you don't then try and claim the IRS tax deduction for a gift to a charity. There are special rules for gifts of travel and lodging, which I truly don't have the time to get into here, but if you are being provided travel and or lodging by a third party other than the district, please be aware that you need to talk to Ms. Carbuccia about that, and she'll walk you through what the rules say.
Question,
Yes.
what if I'm doing traveling and stuff through another organization?
And it's part of your job,
Yes,
that's completely non-reportable. There's an exception for that.
okay,
Yep. Good.
because I do.
Yeah, no, yeah. Okay, I think this might be our last slide. And this is, in a lot of ways, it's common sense, right? It's going with the theme here that we are stewards of the public funds and the public trust, and so the law is going to require that when we are awarding contracts, we do so in an ethical and fair manner, in a way that achieves for the district the best possible value for their dollar, so that your taxpayers can be assured that you're responsibly spending the money to which they've entrusted you. The way we handle that is by requiring bidding on what are called public works. And I have to admit that these are very broad statements. It's not always going to be 100%. For example, not every construction project is a public work, right? There are dollar thresholds that we are fully aware of. But just know that if the district's spending money on a public construction project, you're going to have to do it after conducting a public bidding process, where you must award to the lowest responsible and responsive bidder the project itself. Any work that is being done by labor on those projects must be done at prevailing rates of wages. And a couple of other quick ones I threw in there are just, there's a law in California called mass mailing restrictions. I understand it probably doesn't come into play here. I don't think this district sends out pieces of mail. But if you ever wanted to, you should know that the law says if you're going to send out 500 pieces or more of physical mail, you may not do so if it features a public official, meaning like your picture is there or there's a story about you. You can list all the board members on the masthead, of course, but you can't feature a public official. And the idea there is, and there are lots of rules about this, by the way, or similar to this, the idea there is we don't want to give you an unfair advantage over just regular people who may want to run against you one day to use public funds to essentially campaign. And that's the last bullet point there. Public funds may not be spent on political campaigning for or against a candidate or a ballot measure. Ballot measure, sales tax, property tax, those sorts of things, a bond issue. Those are the common examples that we see. And I'm happy to say that's done.
Before we leave this area,
Ruben,
Yes, sir.
I think Trustee Emerald had a question. She raised her hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to ask about the campaigning issue, about spending public money to promote yourself or your campaign or your position on issues, but you answered it as you were wrapping up that thought. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you, board member.
President.
and I think the one thing I also want to just add in the area of conflict of interest and ethics is the district also has a board policy specifically on this matter that is more stringent than the law. And so we will, if you don't already have a copy, we will provide it to you. And we're happy to talk you through the deeper differences, but we wanted to make sure you had the legal parameters. Our board policy says in sum, if it looks like a conflict, treat it like a conflict. And I think that really is the summary of the history of where we've been as a district for the last little while, on really making sure as we're talking about openness, transparency, and ensuring we maintain the public's trust. And so that, I think, is the big overview. I wanted to just add really quickly, these were, in the old days, we'd call them cliff notes. These were Ruben's notes to summarize these three major areas of the law. What Ruben has kindly done for us also is pull together the 101 instead of the 100 version, which is a deeper summary that gives you about 3 pages on each of these areas in the area that we couldn't go into in 42 minutes. And then if you so decide that you want to go deeper than this or cover any area, we can do trainings individually for you as well, if there are no other questions on the area.
Thank you, Ms. Carbucci, and I really hope that the real takeaway from this is if there's any question or area that's in question, we in our district have the ability to check with our general counsel, and so any question that's in doubt, by all means, send a question. Better to ask ahead of time to get that clarification. Is when this is again an overview. It's meant to be kind of some of the cliff notes, but at the end of the day, anything that you may have a question about. That's exactly the reason why it makes sense for our district to have a general counsel's office so that we can check, because in some instances there are specific exceptions that we are able to avail ourselves of, and so please ask those questions or clarifications. This is again meant to be an overview, but that's something I did want to mention. Before we leave, the fact that we're in this setting and we have a hybrid meeting, if you will, between technology and here, begs the question that the governor has announced that the emergency order will expire at the end of February. Mr. Duran, can you explain to us some of the options that we still have available to us? For example, can we revert to the previous version or iteration of Brown Act, or when not? Can you please go into that?
Sure. Very briefly, until February 28th, the process that you're engaged in here, essentially the COVID rules under which we've been operating for the better part of 2.5 years now, under AB 361 as well, will go away, and a new set of rules is going to come into play. Now, that new set of rules, which I understand the General Counsel's office will be briefing you on in writing in the near future here, does not take away the traditional Brown Act rules that we're all used to. So for those of you who've served on a board or observed boards for a number of years, you remember prior to COVID, you could participate in a meeting, a board member could participate in a meeting telephonically or by video, although video was much less common back then, right? As long as the public knew where that location was going to be, the location itself was posted and was available to the public, that rule is still going to be there. As we're coming out of the pandemic, the legislature has made an attempt, and all due respect to the legislature, it's probably not the last attempt because it's not going to be a perfect solution to the problem, but they made an attempt to essentially allow for remote participation in meetings by video or telephonic without having to post your location on a very limited basis. Essentially, up to 2 times per year, board members may participate if it's warranted and needed, typically for a health reason that has to be disclosed, and who knows about HIPAA and all of that stuff. But the way we're seeing it now, after March 1st, the district can continue to conduct a remote meeting as necessary, where individual board members up to twice a year may choose to participate remotely without posting their location. That's as quick and simple as I can make it. Did I miss anything, Ms. Carbuccia?
But when you do that, if any member of your board is remote, then the public needs to have equivalent protections at least as well to where we would offer it remote. So potentially that could mean a setup where we also are allowing public to call in. I mean, we stream as it is, so it's not, but the real-time notion of being able to participate as well. So it creates some definite snags, and I think that's the reason I would agree with Ruben that it's highly likely that the state legislature will continue to act, and where they end. They obviously, as we've talked about all night, are all about open and transparency, and sometimes that makes it very difficult for us in trying to put that together.
That's right. I see that Vice President has a question.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing from you is with those 2 versions, we're going to go ahead. I mean, we have 2 exceptions during the year that we can do that. I'm going to repeat it. And two exceptions during the year where we can do remote attendance at meetings. And the other ones you would have to put on the notice on your door, outside your door, right? And then we continue. What I'm hearing from Council Carbuccia is that we continue the same way with allowing the public to, the same way we have, by allowing the public to participate via remote, telephone and or physical presence, correct?
Basically, so there's some nuance to that, and I promise you I'll get you a memo in the next week or two that really talk about what those exceptions are, because the 2 isn't like a set number where you get 2 excused absences, right? They're very specific details as to whether or not it's allowable. And there isn't a true clarity around whether that could be challenged. So there's a lot of pieces associated with it that, frankly, it may be a lot easier for us to go back, frankly, to the old rules, or just to allow people to have excused absences.
I mean, and if I may continue with this point, I mean, this is the first time that most public meetings have had this kind of participation due to the access to the internet and telephoning in. I think it's one of those moments where I find the spirit of the law and the letter of the law are always, I don't know, in conflict, but are in competition with each other. And I think that we're seeing this not only on school boards, but in academic senate meetings and other things as well. And I can tell you, this is one of the things I'd like to have: the more transparency and more folks participating, however they may wish to participate.
Yeah, and before we get to Board Member Emerald, who I see her hand is up, excuse me. Dr. Arancibia, the thing that I just try to remember is the legislature, for some reason, has really latched on to this concept of real-time participation. And if we're going to be in a remote setting under the new rules, the rule generally is going to be we got to allow for the public to participate real time. We may not only limit their public comments to submitting in writing or by email beforehand, for example, or recording a voicemail, which is what some agencies have done in the past. I think we're past that now. Board Member Emerald, hello.
Yeah, this is a long, I guess, honored practice in some corners where folks can't make the regular meetings, so they'll meet from their hotel room or their kitchen or whatever. And in the interest of the full disclosure to the public about where you are in your circumstance, I know in the past, while serving on the city council, we've had to notice where we're going to be at a particular time if we're checking in on the meeting by telephone or in some other remote way. And I can see where it can kind of come undone. The threads start to get a little bare here with all of the hybrid meetings and so forth with COVID. And somehow we do have to kind of pull it back together again and make sure the public isn't shut out and that we're not actually meeting behind closed doors, which ultimately is what happens when folks aren't in the regular place of business and aren't disclosing fully about where they are and why they're not there. That's my take on it.
And I think the point is well taken, yes. And I think the legislature is trying to balance that dynamic with, where we've been over the past 2.5 years and where do we go from here. That's why I think it's a work in progress.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not going to get settled right away, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of back and forth about it, but we can come up with our basic concept, the tenet we want to follow, which I believe is transparency, and do that in good conscience as others are trying to argue it out. So if the board and management can come up with some kind of a plan going forward, I think that would be really good for us. And again, in relating to what Ms. Carbucci was saying, in light of the history of the district and the lack of transparency that has occurred in the past, I think that the public would really appreciate our taking a lead on this and being very forthcoming about how we're going to handle it going forward. That's just my thought.
Thank you. Any further questions before I ride off into the sunset? Certainly a pleasure to be with you all again. I wish we were all in person. I wish you a really successful 2023.
Thank you, Mr. Duran. As always, we appreciate your knowledge and sharing this information with us, though. So thank you.
I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. And to Trustee Emerald's question, we'll definitely get to work on putting together something to really kind of be in the lead and not necessarily be in a position to wait until the legislature acts. We'll start working on putting some thoughts to paper.
I appreciate you saying that because it really is important. And if we take the lead, I think others will follow it and we can build greater consensus that way. Instead of dragging our feet and waiting for somebody to tell us what to do.
Exactly.
Thanks.
So we'll get to work on that. All right. Well, thank you so much. That concludes the Brown Act and ethics training portion of this workshop. Next up, another critical area of the work that we do has to do with our budget and really the monitoring process and the reporting process. So for that, I'll ask our Chief Financial Officer, Dr. Jenny Sockel, to take the lead on presenting information on where we currently stand in the budget development process as it applies specifically to school systems. And then as we go through any information, any questions that may come up, please feel free to chime in. And so with that, I'll ask Dr. Sockel to present. Dr. Sockel.
Thank you, Dr. Aguirre. So good evening, Dr. Arancibia, Board Trustees, Cabinet, and Superintendent, and our community. So what we're going to cover in this section, as Dr. Aguirre mentioned, is a couple of highlights regarding the reporting process. We did touch upon this during the the first interim that we just presented last month. So some of it's going to be a review. So I'm going to start with the budget timeline. As you can see here, what we highlighted last month, during a course of a year, we're actually at 3 different points in time looking retroactively at the prior year, looking at the current year, and then looking prospectively at the next year. And so, as you can see, we start off the year with our budget adoption, working at the current year, but in September, we do that look back. We look at our unaudited actuals. How did the prior year close out? And that's what starts our audit process with our external auditors to then bring forward to you, as we did last month in December, the audited financials presented by Crow. And then we also brought you the first interim, another view of where we're at with the current year budget. Where we're at in that second row now, starting in the blue boxes there, we're actually starting to do our work for 23-24. We're going to be awaiting the governor's release of the state budget by tomorrow, statutorily. That's when he releases the budget. And we'll get new information on different parameters that roll into some of our financial calculations, such as revenue and so forth. But we'll be starting our work this week, releasing allocations to our school sites, as an example, looking at their staffing allocations. They're looking at staffing overall. They'll be working very closely with human resources and their respective deadlines as we work ahead through the next few months in accordance with some of the education requirements or education code requirements as well. And then we'll bring forward the second interim, which is another view of the current year. And then we continue our work in May into June in alignment with the latest updates we get from the state. So the governor again will release another update on the 23-24 budget, known as the May budget revision, and then leading into the work that we do with Dr. Alvarez and her team around the local control accountability plan, which she'll touch upon as well. So that's kind of a cycle of what we do in one given year, looking at actually 3 different time periods. This is a snapshot. This is actually a document that we bring forward to our Audit and Finance Subcommittee that highlights all of the key statutory reports that we bring forward to the board for approval around those items that I just highlighted. There's also some compliance reports around investments, which are a cash position for each of our accounts at the county treasury that we bring forward to you. And we've also noted the specific education code that it aligns to. And many of these reports, we also touched upon this last month, you'll hear us say SACS reports. It's the standardized account code structure. These are uniform financial reports. It's set by the state, what we remit to you as the board, but also to the County Office of Education, and then ultimately to the California Department of Education. So it's a uniform report that any school district follows within the state, and even charter schools kind of look at a certain format so that it's consistently applied for the public and for many end users of those financials. And those reports are then also based off of the California School Accounting Manual. That manual highlights the different procedures on how we account for different funds, different accounts. That provides the infrastructure or the baseline of how we then execute our accounting transactions. And this next slide ties to that standardized account code structure, along with what also ties to our business and accounting system. So this is what we call our budget string. We call it different either pieces of the puzzle or different buckets, sometimes as I call it, depending on the different funding sources. It really highlights overall what are our funds, where are the different categories of monies that we get from the state. That's what you hear us talk about, like resources. Those resource numbers, again, are released by the state. They provide us the numbers to use. Different goals, functions, object codes are the different accounts we use, the school sites or the departments, cost centers. It's just different ways of us being able to query data that for various reports, going back to that SACS report that we bring to you, or even other agencies. We have our finance team works on quite a few reports to different reporting agencies, so a lot of them have different needs and requirements, and so this accounts code structure, this budget string, helps us derive and query that data.
Do the X's have any significance, or is it just a space holder?
It's for the number of digits
Okay.
that we have. So our fund is 2 digits. That all goes back to our accounting system. And then our resources, we move into our new Infor accounting system. Right now we're on 4 digits. We're going to be on 6 digits. So it's just a corresponding number of that particular segment.
Okay.
And then the next item is position control. So our budget is about 86% personnel costs. And so this is a key area for the district, particularly going back to 2017-18, which really provided a focus on our financials and the areas of, as I say, opportunity at the time in moving forward and really putting an infrastructure in place that was lacking at the time. As you can see to the right, I call it the three-legged stool. Position control really looks at the budget part of it to ensure that all our positions are in fact accounted for, how it ties to the work with human resources so that when they're staffing and they're placing someone in a position, that it's in alignment with what's in the budget. And then ultimately it provides the internal controls and the checks and balances for payroll to pay that individual. So those 3 items are key areas in the implementation and execution of positions within our financials. And you can see here, it's critical for those checks and balances and internal control. It's a lot of what stemmed with various reports that came about in 2017-18, but it's our best practice now going forward that we've had in place for quite a few years now. In January of 2019, we implemented also a position control committee that reviews vacant positions, particularly on classified side, but also certificated depending on management, kind of looking at those vacant positions and asking questions. When there's new position requests, we review that as well, and we bring all new position requests to the superintendent to review as well. So we make sure a lot of eyes are on that as we move forward and roll those type of positions into our budget. And this just highlights the need for it. Like I mentioned earlier, the segregation of duties, that's what maintains the integrity of the process as a whole. We do engage with various stakeholders. Things that we've put in place over the last few years is meeting with departments, meeting with principals, going over their budgets, looking at all their staffing needs, and having periodic meetings during the year to ensure that things are being recorded timely and like our payroll, making sure things are processed accordingly. So it's definitely a collective effort with a lot of folks through that process. So just kind of highlighting that. The next section we're going to move to is local control funding formula. It's our LCFF. This is a slide that I had shared during our first interim presentation. And so the source of revenues where the district gets the bulk of the monies is from the state, derived from the state. Local control funding formula is made up of state aid, property taxes, some of the key components to that, and also the educational protection account are the three categories that make up LCFF. But there are various variables that come into that calculation, and that calculator that is provided by the state as well. And so we look at the cost of living adjustment. And so that's actually with tomorrow's budget from the state will give us another opportunity to look at those numbers, how that projects out to future years. But numbers that we are respective to our school district are such as the average daily attendance, where that's been. We have been in much higher numbers in the past. We're around 94%. We're now around this 92% number that we have budgeted. But it gives us an opportunity throughout the year to see that progress in those areas, and that's when we make those calibrations throughout the year when we bring you those different reports. And so this is just a snapshot of where we're at right now. And then with that, this is a component also of the calculator that you can see our overall funding, our base grants, but then also our supplemental concentration. So this carve out of the budget, this was as a first interim, we had a little over $67 million. That is the basis of the local control accountability plan and what Dr. Alvarez will highlight, and the need for us to provide explanations, highlight how those funds are being utilized, including our stakeholder input and so forth. And also how we're improving services that's noted here, these different percentages. So this is derived from that LCFF calculator and then the work that's done to help support our students and our schools. And with that, are there any questions?
As we say, I don't think, oh, there we go. We couldn't see the screen.
Trustee Emerald?
Thank you very much. I've got a couple of questions, actually. First, the very last slide with regard to the changing amounts of money over the course of the three calendar or fiscal years. What accounts for the increase this next year and then the decrease the following? How do you make those projections?
So those are all derived, I don't know if Deanne, if you can pull that back up. It's all the variables. Such as it's derived from the average daily attendance.
Okay.
It's derived also on, especially with the supplemental and concentration, where that can vary, is our unduplicated student percentage. That's our free and reduced students, our low income, and also foster youth, depending on what those percentages are. That can also vary out in our out year numbers.
So those all add up to a model, and you foresee some increases and then decreases during the course of the next couple of years.
Correct. And these are just based on our projections, what we know of today, right? And how that will reflect in the out years.
Do you do that then ongoing? Is that always a changing kind of a number depending upon how the actuals roll out?
Correct. And we look at that. That's during the first interim, second interim, each of these statutory reporting cycles. It gives us that opportunity to reevaluate those numbers. And then when we close out the year, we have our final data to look back for that year.
Okay, and see if we were on point or not. Huh? And then you talk about a 45-day budget. Are you reviewing every 45 days, or are we keeping tabs on it in that kind of a concentration?
So we have a statutory requirement for that 45-day. What we bring forward to the board in August is any key financial change that was in the final state budget. So in June, because we're preparing the budget based on the information we have from the May revise in June, and so when the governor signs and executes the final state budget, if there's any increase to revenue, such as what was this last go-round, we then brought an informational item to the board in August to let you know what those changes are. But from a periodic business practice, we do review our financials every month. We include that on a Friday update to the board. And internally on our team and the finance, we're reviewing, we're checking in with program managers and with principals on just day to day to make sure we're on tracking and moving forward to each of those reporting cycles.
But ultimately, it depends upon what's happening at the state?
on some of those statutory requirements or
Yeah.
at the local level, like our average daily attendance.
And then you talk about position control, and we're at 86%. Is that standard? How does that compare to other school districts that are kind of comparable to us?
We're pretty close to the standard. We hear from School Services of California and others that say to be around 85% personnel costs. There are some districts here in the county that are close to 94%. It varies from school district to school district. So then the higher that is on personnel, then it kind of limits some other considerations. If you have fixed costs to take into account, other contracts, things like that. But it varies, but from a best practice, we're close to that range of where
So
we're
this is kind of like you're saying a best practice, like let's be conservative so that we have a little wiggle room if we need it.
at. Correct. Yeah, because of
Thank
the
you.
other costs, right? If there's fixed costs that are utilities or other things start escalating, what's the give?
Oh, like the cost of natural gas. Are we using natural gas in our schools?
Yeah, we do have a component with gas in our
Well,
budget.
yeah, and I bring that up because, that's one commodity that is off the charts here in San Diego compared to the rest of the country. But that 86% is kind of conservative so that if we do have, we have some wiggle room if we need to cover other costs. Is that what you're getting
Right,
at?
that covers our costs as of today and then any of our other fixed costs, correct?
Hey, thank you.
balance.
Appreciate your time. And the indulgence of the other board members. I just wanted to get those questions out. Thank you.
The one corollary I did want to add to that is that it's really important for us to keep a real close eye on the overall number of enrollment because we've seen a trend, and last year we commissioned a study on our demographic projections moving forward through the end of this decade. And the trend is very clear because of different reasons, such as the high cost of living in the San Diego area. The trend is very clear that there's an anticipated further decline in enrollment. So for us to be fiscally prudent, it means we have to continuously analyze where the enrollment stands because our funding is tied to the average daily attendance, which is a percentage of our enrollment. So because of that, it's a key variable that we need to constantly monitor. Again, because that's where the demographers are generally anticipating the enrollment is heading, not just for our district, but really across California, given the cost of living. So that's, I just wanted to add that as a corollary to the comments by Dr. Salkeld.
Could I ask you one more question, Moises, here?
Sure.
With regard to that, do we build in any kind of a program that helps to promote the district for people to come, bring their kids here? Marketing?
Yeah,
I
so
guess?
in the last couple of years, we have had a pretty robust effort by our communications department. For example, we do radio and online ads promoting our programs, promoting our schools. Given that we offer a very robust set of programs and services for our students, we definitely want to make sure our families understand. And we do it in multiple languages too, given the demographics of the South Bay. But it's a focus we've had, I think, for at least the last 2 years. Prior to that, it was a little bit more challenging to do that. But we continue to see how we can grow that effort to make sure we are getting the word out about the programs that we offer.
Sure. Get the story out. It'll get people's attention and maybe they'll want to check us out. Huh?
That's a big
Thank
part
you.
of it. That's a big part of it. Thank you. Okay, well, if there are not any further questions, we can go ahead and progress. Vice President Arancibia, is it okay for us to move forward?
Yes, I mean, let's go ahead and move forward. The next topic for discussion is LCAP, and this is done by Dr. Ana Maria Alvarez, correct?
That is correct. So with that introduction, I'll ask Dr. Alvarez to get into our local control and accountability plan, and she can provide that overview, the context, and what does this mean for our district specifically. So Dr. Alvarez.
Good evening. Thank you, Dr. Aguirre. Thank you, Dr. Arancibia, board members. It's a pleasure to be here, to our staff and to our community. I tried to set this up within the context of what we did this year, which is really kind of an ongoing model of what we do on a yearly basis. There are a couple of nuances that are just a little bit different because of COVID and some other things that happened. But we'll go through those. So the California Ed Code does require school districts to have a development of their local control funding formula. There's a budget overview that is given every year for parents. In conjunction, we developed the local control accountability plan. And that plan has to go in conjunction with our budget. Dr. Salkeld, her team, our team, school site teams work very diligently to develop a plan cohesively. And so we take in June a hearing, a first read of the budget. That budget includes the LCAP, and then it also includes the general budget. As Dr. Salkeld mentioned in one of the questions, the reason that we have the local control accountability plan is for two reasons. One is really, it's a supplemental plan to support students that are listed as unduplicated students. And that's such a, that's not a great title, but it is really trying to meet the needs of our neediest students. So it's looking at our students who are low income, and that's identified by free and reduced lunch. Our students in the homeless foster youth, and also our students that are language learners. And so we are identified based on that. And the way that it's calculated for us, it's a running 3-year average. And so when we say we're 60% unduplicated, that's over a 3-year period, and that's how the funding is allocated to us. We have this LCAP timeline, and for us, just like Dr. Salkeld, it's an ongoing timeline. We are always in one cycle of either preparing for or evaluating the current LCAP. Last year, as we prepared for the 22-23 LCAP, there was an additional element. We had to do an LCAP supplement, and that really had to do with all the additional funding that was allocated because of COVID-related expenditures and other elements. So we did that in February of last year. We believe, and it's of course mandated by the law, that our educational partners really have to be intricately involved in the development of this plan. So we start in February having meetings. We do workshops with our families and our parents. Our DAC or DPAC, our District Parent Advisory Committee, and our DLAC, our District English Learner Advisory Committee, really are those two forums that guide and support our LCAP development, but we use other means also to engage community partners. And that may be that we do trustee area presentations, we've done surveys, we've done other elements to ensure that we get the voice of our community, of our students, and we also include the voice of our staff and our administrators so that they're part of the work that is ongoing. So we look at our data. There's LCAP metrics. We have 8 priority areas that need to be addressed. We look at the metrics that are tied with that. And then we start looking at what actions and services we have in our LCAP and how they're working, what's not working, where are our students at that point in time, and how can we improve those supports. During April, June, we have an open public comment period where community members, staff, students can provide any type of feedback that we have, that they have, bring up concerns, make suggestions, and we look at how we integrate those into the next year's LCAP. As I mentioned, we have a public hearing where the LCAP draft is presented along with the current budget for the next year. And then at the end of June, the last meeting in June, we have an adoption period. With that, as was mentioned, there is a 45-day LCAP or budget adoption, and I'll talk a little bit about that in just a moment, where we had some adjustments this year because of the ongoing budget changes that occurred at the state level. So as I mentioned, the LCAP is really kind of our overarching strategic plan. Although it's not the major part of our budget, it is a large part of a budget. When you talk about $65 to $70 million, that has a lot of impact on the services and actions that we can afford our students. And so we have identified in a very long process our LCAP goals, and it's primarily 4 major goals. The first one is to make sure that each student is prepared to succeed in college and career. That's the ultimate goal. And most of our funding is actually attributed to that goal. The second one is making sure that we have those safe and learning environments for our students. That including building our culture of equity, making sure that we have positive climates for our students. Once again, that environment that provides and nurtures student learning. The third one is making sure that our parents, community engagement, our educational partners are really incorporated into the work that we're doing, that we're developing our parent advocacy. We offer opportunity for our parents and community to learn and engage in the work. And then the last one is one that is such an element that is just critical because it really is that foundational support of having all those structures on the operational side that assist in making sure that the other three goals actually function and do well. So this just kind of is an at point in time where we were last year as we were developing the budget. Dr. Salkeld gave you a budget overview of where we are now. But just to note what the changes are as we go through this budget process, there were changes that were occurring throughout this time. We mentioned, Dr. Salkeld mentioned, that average daily attendance and enrollment of how critical that is. Our funding is based on the number of students that we have enrolled in this district, along with the average daily attendance. Because of the structures and issues that we've had over the last 2.5 years with COVID, the pandemic, certainly our rates for our ADA at one point were over 94%. We're now at about a 92%. So that impacts the income and the supports that can be provided. And we continually try to do other mechanisms to encourage students to attend. We opened up Launch Virtual Academy. So that gives students another venue, an opportunity to attend school. So we're trying to be as innovative as possible to ensure that we are maintaining our enrollment and our ADA as we go through this. As I mentioned, the community feedback and the engagement is an ongoing process. We have monthly DLAC and DPAC meetings. At every meeting, we talk about the goals, we overview the LCAP. There are certain points in time during the year where the meeting is all about the LCAP and they provide input. That input then it's shared with cabinet, it's shared with our administrators, it's shared with staff, and then we look at how we can incorporate that input into our final product. Last year when we looked at the LCAP and the community suggestions, they were really trying to look at how do you support kids in distance learning. I mean, that was just one of the issues that we were having. How do you provide a way for parents to engage when they're in distance meetings? And so just making sure that we had their feedback incorporated. One of the things that they had for our parents was also the safety and the climate in the classrooms, making sure that our bathrooms were safe, our supervision was increased, just supports across the campuses. So all of those elements were included into our LCAP last year. These were some of the LCAP needs that were identified. Absenteeism was a huge issue. We had college and career readiness, just making sure that we were augmenting our career technical education programs, ensuring that we were able to augment our language arts and math. Our math areas, especially as we looked at those 2 years in distance learning. Math is difficult for some students, in particular with the mathematics program that we have, which is very language intensive. Our English learners needed additional support, so we integrated those supports for them. We looked at how do we increase our graduation rates. As a high school district, we have a fairly strong and robust graduation rate, but there are still, when we look at some of our subgroups, we have areas where there's a gap. And so this year's LCAP was looking at how do we close that gap for our English learners, our students with disabilities, and in some cases, our Latino males. So we looked at how do we support students in general to increase their ability to graduate. And then as we all know, during the pandemic and even prior to the pandemic. Student mental health and well-being was certainly something that we had to attribute. And so you'll see in our LCAP elements that provide additional counseling, additional social workers, nursing supports, our medical collaboratives, and other options to support student mental health. And then not only do we look at, the general just 6 periods a day of instruction, we also look at how do we engage students outside the school day so that we can augment some of those after-school programs. And so the after-school programs are included in here as well. And then just as with anything, our teachers, our staff, our classified members, our professional development to ensure that we have the latest tools, resources, and educational experience to provide to our students the best options. We continue to provide professional development through our LCAP as well. As I mentioned, that 45-day adjustment, we had some carryover that was adjusted, and so we, during that time, so in June, we provided a plan. Sorry. In August, we added some additional funding because of the carryover, and we identified what those additional allocations would be. And so you'll see right here that we increased our allocations for our libraries. Excuse me one second. Our athletic directors, attendance coordinators, once again, that outreach to families and students to re-engage them, our ASB advisors, the social workers that I mentioned before, our school psychologist. We saw a lot more increase in referrals or initial assessments for students for special education, and then continuing our CTE, our college career pathways, as well as looking at offering at the high schools learning recovery and acceleration coaches so that students could receive credit recovery for those courses that they needed to recoup. So the LCAP is ongoing. We are in the process now where in January, February, we start those meetings with our DLAC, DPAC in looking at where we are with the metrics that we have from first semester. And then using that data, we analyze where we are, where we need to be, and then based on their suggestions, what they're seeing, what our staff sees, we look at the development of the LCAP for the next year. And so that's an ongoing process that we do throughout the year. So if there are any questions.
I have a question. My question is, therefore, your LCAP is developed every year, refined and developed and updated?
Yes.
Versus from the district I work at, it's a 3-year plan, and we evaluate every year and make changes.
So our plan, because it's a state template, so our plan is a 3-year plan, but it's a revolving 3 years.
Right.
And so we do look at it each year, and then we modify as needed. Our goals have been consistent. We've maintained those goals over the last 8 years. But what's changed is sometimes those actions and services where you see that maybe an action as in service is not making the more than just a nominal increase. We look at potentially changing that, reevaluating it. So we look at it data quite a lot, looking at the efficacy of a program, if that program has made impact or not. So that's the evaluation that we do, and those are the potential changes. What we've noted is that there, sometimes when there's increase in funding, there's additional programs that we can offer that really are a little bit more supplemental in nature. And so those are also some of those modifications.
And then I've got a question, if I may.
Go ahead, Trustee
Thank
Earl.
you for the report, by the way. This has been really interesting. You're talking about the period between April and June, public comment with regard to the LCAC and programs where priorities are. I know that April is still a couple of months away, but it will be here in no time. How soon can we get a schedule of where those meetings are happening, when they're happening, so that we can come sit in on them?
We will provide that to you in a Friday update so that you get those as soon as possible. What we do is we work with Dr. Salkeld's office, the state and federal programs, and myself, and we develop a timeline so that we can have everything mapped out as we go along. Because there's some input meetings that we have with DLAC and DPAC, but then there's also the ability of having some forums. And some of those have been virtual forums, some have been in person. We've also conducted surveys. And so we'll give you the timeline of all those events so that the board is fully cognizant.
As you're moving toward that and the plans are starting to come together, will we get an update on what this whole thing is going to look like so that maybe we can at least start working it in our heads and maybe offer feedback?
Yes, definitely.
That'd be terrific. Thank you.
Any further questions from the board? Dr. Aguirre, would you like to add some concluding thoughts?
Yes, thank you so much, Vice President Arancibia. So again, the goal of today was to begin establishing some collective understandings as we move forward for our work. I think the three areas that we presented today were really foundational in terms of the work moving forward, whether it was kind of the methods through which we work, which Brown Act and ethics rules, whether it's our budget and finance or our LCAP, which is our really in essence, our long-term strategic goal and our strategic plan. So again, this effort is not meant to be the end all be all. We're gonna continue the work. The next steps would probably be in terms of identifying some of the services and actions included in that LCAP. Those 4 areas I think are really worthwhile, but what can adjust is those services and actions that we take, particularly as the moment that we're going through is different than what we were going through even last year and a couple years ago. So it is an evolving document, and it's meant to adjust to our conditions. And when we were writing our initial LCAP, nobody could have seen a global pandemic coming. And we adjusted. We made adjustments in our investments and what services and what actions we prioritized as a district in order to make sure that we're supporting our students and our staff in a way that made sense given the context. And so now we're in a different moment. We are in a much different place in terms of the pandemic. We're in a much different place in terms of our own district's budget standing. So I think we're really in a place where we're ready to go and make some really important next steps in terms of our growth, and really focusing on the teaching and learning of our students, which is where we are very grateful to be at this point in time, now that we can move on from what we've been through over the last couple of years. And I really look forward to the work that we're going to be doing together as a governance team. Again, this is kind of the first step of many steps to come, and I really appreciate the work of staff, of the board, really taking into account how we can make adjustments to our programs and to our vision so that we can come together with some collective action steps. So with that, I want to say thank you to the Board of Trustees and to staff for this workshop, because again, it'll be foundational in terms of moving our work forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Aguirre. And I would, with that, I would like to go ahead and call this special board workshop is now adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for participating and all the information that was given to us today. Thank you, Ms. Brisedo, for all the help with making sure we all transmitted well. And with that, we'll close.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody. Okay, bye-bye.
Good night.